Okay, we should be able to get Ethan on stream. So I'm gonna call Ethan up. And we'll get talking to Ethan. Hello, Ethan.
Okay, this is going to be confusing. I'm going to have to meet you on Twitch.
Yeah, meet me on Twitch. I'm actually going to crank you up a bit and my background music down a bit on Twitch as well, just so that... Alright, just say a bunch of stuff so I can check the audio balance.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're probably good. Someone will let me know if you're too loud. Right. So...
You wanted me to talk about westmarches.
I did. I wanted you to talk about westmarches, which I'm aware may introduce some PTSD trauma symptoms. So we'll try and keep it as light as possible.
Should I start with what a westmarches is?
So I think I'm marketing to the old school community, which is obviously the style of play westmarches was trying to emulate. So I think most people are going to be pretty familiar. Watching the VOD or watching the it live.
So if you read the first
the
book
Ars Ludi
from...
one that I have on screen right now. Well, I don't have it on screen right now because I hid my screen to do some admin stuff, but that in a few moments when the Twitch delay elapses will be visible on your screen.
Yes. No. I think the old D&D book says D&D is a game for between like 4 and 50 people.
Yeah, so the one I really like is the module U3, which has at the start of it, this adventure is designed to be played for 10 to 15 people. Which, not just a game in general, but a single adventure designed for that many people. So,
westmarches. It's a game.
Yeah.
Where you don't always have the same party.
Yes.
I ran a westmarches campaign in 5e for a group of people at a university.
Yep.
I thought I'd be running it for about 14. I ended up running it for about 50.
Yes.
I made a lot of mistakes.
And that's what I want to talk to you about, because I want to learn from your mistakes so that I don't have to make them.
Okay.
So
now we can talk about 5e specific stuff, which I have learned a lot about. More about recently, or I can just go general stuff.
I'm going to be running it in Basic Edition, so we're back in 1981, because I don't see the point of trying to emulate old style play when you can just play with the old rules that have it baked into the system. But I'm curious on your thoughts on what about 5e worked and didn't work, so that I can, on a case-by-case basis, address that from a basic and expert perspective.
So all 5e issues, all 5e specific issues, revolve around balance, essentially.
Which is already out the window with OSR because balance isn't the thing.
Yes. However, I have recently discovered that there is a very interesting rule that Adventurers League, I believe it's called, uses.
Yep.
For 5e, which is the Player's Handbook plus one other source material for character creation.
Yes.
Which instantly fixes all balance problems you can ever think of.
Okay, so you're thinking more of character balance rather than encounter balance.
Encounter balance, okay.
Because the thing is, character balance is a thing in Basic and Expert, but encounter balance isn't.
So, to be honest, there are some... Before we even get to encounter balance, there are some very fundamental questions you need to answer. Before anything, which is, firstly, do you care about continuity between sessions? And between sessions, between different people?
Yeah, so if you're exploring a dungeon, do you... does the dungeon reset between sessions?
Or stuff. If you do care about continuity and all that stuff, and making the world have a realistic sense of time and people already going to places and such, you can do that, but it's going to be a hell of a lot more work.
So, Are you familiar with the concept of the mythic underworld from old school play?
Old school play, I know nearly nothing about it.
Okay, so the mythic underworld is what evolved into the Underdark in modern games. But the mythic underworld is so much more interesting than that. And my favorite description of it is by a viewer of the stream. I don't know if they're around at the moment, but I assume not because I'm running this at a weird time that I don't normally stream at. And I've not been doing it for a week. But it is from the game Bears Fruit by Jirio. And I will just quickly pull up his description of the mythic underworld because it is a fantastic description that covers what it is very elegantly. So here we go. Control F mythic. Okay. Thus begins the mythic underworld, common to many dungeons in our hobby. For those of you unfamiliar with this trope, it is common for the lower levels of dungeons to be worlds unto themselves, where things make less sense and where reality becomes strange and warped. As more of the orchard comes into view, you see fruit trees growing in every direction, as if gravity no longer holds sway over them. If you pick any of the bear-shaped fruit, read Protocol N to see details about it. The chambers are lit by a green-yellow light that emits from every stalagmite and stalactite, bright as daylight. And so the Mythic Underworld is this setting that is implicit to old school play, where once you go deep enough into the earth, the rules of the world can be whatever the dungeon needs them to be.
So essentially, like for 5e, it's sort of similar with the Feywild, where essentially you can get around the continuity area
Exactly.
via DM fiat of the world is weird.
Exactly. Essentially, old school play had, instead of the Feywild being this parallel plane of existence, if you go deep enough, things get weird enough. My plan is to set the... So I've got a lot of freedom with what I do with the setting. What I'm going to basically be doing is... I've already mentioned this to the people that played last year, because obviously this is a continuation of the open table game I ran over the course of the past year. My plan is to do a 200-year time skip. That the characters of the existing game are insulated from through plot contrivance to enable them to keep their characters. But that in which I am going to be drastically changing the shape of the world so that we have a mythic overworld setting. So you don't even need to go deep to get this weirdness. And so a huge amount of things like continuity and time control and the feeling of the world, I can just wavy because we're essentially playing in a fucked up, distorted view of reality where the rules can be whatever any particular dungeon needs them to be.
Yeah, that doing that solves a lot of issues, but it does become somewhat harder to write compelling stories.
Yeah, so this is where I think the goal for me here is made a lot easier because I don't have to play to new school expectations. You know what the story is? The story is you guys going through, clearing out these zany mythic overworld locations, sticking a castle down there and calling it safe. You know, one of the most standout things that's in right there in the old rules is here's how you go about building a castle, and it's because this level of play where you create your own essentially you create your own kingdom encroaching on civilization is built into the game. Now I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about there because of westmarches city simulator that but we'll get to that one in a bit. But I think for me, I don't have to worry about writing stories as much as I have to worry about writing set pieces, because the players will find their own stories in those set pieces, is my goal.
So, okay, well, it's probably worth talking about the player side of things and how players interact within the West Marches.
Mm-hmm.
Because this fundamentally can, depending on how large a group you have, can cause issues.
Yeah.
So, firstly, the most obvious way players interact is by doing dungeons.
Yeah.
Which you'd think would be simple. We'll get onto that later.
Okay.
The other one is by role-playing with each other, which, again, you'd think would be simple but can get complicated.
Yeah.
And another one is downtime, which I don't think OD&D has.
So it actually does, but it very differently. So the expectation of downtime in OD&D is actually that it takes you a month to level up. And the expectation is that essentially, whereas in a modern game, your level up just kind of comes and slaps you in the face.
You
There's
take a long rest and you level up.
exactly. Whereas in the old school style of D&D, for example, to talk about that U3 module that I mentioned earlier, it explicitly says in there, due to the nature of this module, it is expected to be played over multiple levels, but there will not be downtime for players to level up, so grant them their level ups immediately. And it makes an explicit note that we're deviating from the norm. So rather than downtime being this strange thing you have to fill, downtime is the time in which your character is training to be better at their class. And that's an implicit part of the old school implied setting.
Okay. The other final way of interacting with players can interact with a westmarches is by building a base, essentially, because they need a home base.
Yeah.
It is possible to just have to put up some rules for people to build base and make stuff. All four of these things can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, they can all go horribly. Them going horribly wrong all has the same root cause.
Okay.
Which is players having different play styles and different expectations. And I won't name any names here, but there is one particular situation that happened in West Marches that sums this up
Yeah.
perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. So I know exactly. I'm gonna. We're not on.
And it involves a zombie beholder.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're on the same page, and I agree with you.
So, there was a party who was returning to a previously explored dungeon, and the way we had this dungeon set up was there was a level 1 area, a level 3 area, and a level 5 area. It was the very first dungeon. When people came into it at level 1 and decided to do the level 3 part instead of the level 1 part because players
Yeah. Players.
they didn't do the level 5 part. So they came back, another group came back later to do level 1 part, and they came across a bunch of goblins. The goblins were performing a sacrifice. Now, some of the players decide to formulate a plan where they would try and buddy up with goblins because one of the players is a goblin.
Yeah.
And they do that by threatening to sacrifice another one of the players. They explain out of character this is their plan. They do not discuss this in character.
Yeah.
The player being sacrificed basically goes, well, my character, in character, doesn't know this.
Yeah.
You've not attempted to inform him in any way.
Yeah.
And you can guess the results of that, which is confusion, essentially, because the character who was going to be sacrificed thinks he's actually going to be sacrificed, and that player decided to roleplay that out to fruition by going to the level 5 area, which happens to have a zombie beholder.
Yeah.
And let's just say, chaos ensued.
Yeah, the story there became very derailed very quickly.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, basically,
how
setting expectations for those sorts of things like metagaming, how likely death is, and such is incredibly important.
yeah.
And also to remind people that I would say you'd need to remind them almost every session.
So death, I think, is a lot easier. Old school players are much more used to and okay with death than new school players, purely because you have 6 HP and if you run out of them, you die. Rather than your sort of basic starting character in 5e with their, maybe 10 hit points, and if they run out of them, they get to make saves.
Unless you are the certain person who likes creating characters who die really easily.
Oh, I mean, I'm honestly amazed that a certain character lived as long as they did.
I think we are thinking of different characters,
I'm thinking
but
of I'm thinking of Mr. Chemotherapy. Who are you thinking of?
a character with 4 hit points.
Who had 4 hit points? That was
Who got one shot by a helmed horror.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
But regardless, so you need expectation. Firstly, what is your agreement on how information, the difference between in-character and out-of-character information being passed? Essentially, metagaming.
And that's an interesting one, because I think the lines there are a lot more blurred in old school play than they are in modern play. Because old school play places this emphasis on what we call player skill, whereas new school play places more emphasis on what we call character ability. So a lot more discussions happen at the meta level of how should we solve this problem in old school play than they do in modern, is my interpretation based on what I've seen.
Yes. It's essentially, if you are playing the game as a strategist, which old school D&D is directly derived from old war games, which is
exactly
strategy games. If you're just playing D&D purely for strategy and not for roleplay, and roleplay is not the same as the story.
Yeah. No, exactly. So I think my personal take here, and I think this one is one that is going to have to come down to personal takes, is that I really enjoy roleplay. I think roleplay is a really great part of the game.
If you are role-playing, though, then you essentially almost have to preclude quite a lot of metagaming, essentially saying, no, you... Actually, no. Let me rephrase that.
Mm-hmm.
If you have somebody who... If you have a party that has people who purely want to hardcore roleplay, and another part of the party that just want to strategize and essentially play out the most optimal scenario, those two people can end up rubbing against each other. And in a normal campaign, where you're just running through the same group over and over again, you can sort that out as a DM.
Yeah.
It is simple enough. For a westmarches campaign, because you're changing individual groups so much, well, should be if you're got your system running right, you essentially, players won't know each other as well, which means you actually have to specify what the rules are for meta information and such and stuff like that. And it might be possible to do it group by group basis, but it's probably easier just to have a flat out rule for the entire campaign saying, this is how much information you can transmit via the meta.
So I think what I think I will put in a sort of enshrine into rules, because I think this is the best way to handle it. At the table, the game is more on the strategy game side of things, but your characters have to be able to communicate privately in order for you to orchestrate that. So if you're in a situation where you're in a room with monsters and the monsters speak common, you don't get to strategize. I'm going to go to each person and ask them what they as an individual do. And if they want to try and talk to people, they're talking in common and the goblins are listening. If you're in a situation where you are isolated, where you are maybe, you're on the horses riding out to the dungeon, you are in a room you've already cleared and you've not opened the door to the next area yet, at that point, or you're in a puzzle room where there's no time pressure, there's no... Because there is always time pressure of wandering monsters and random events and things like that are intrinsic to old school play, but there's no time pressure of, hey, a combat's going to break out right now. We're very much in the dungeon layer rather than the encounter layer, because you have these direct layers of abstraction in old school play. And I think at that level, I'm completely fine with people basically having these meta discussions about what to do, because their characters could plausibly communicate them to each other. And I will say that it is implicit that what you are discussing is what your characters are discussing, unless you say otherwise.
Yes, with the encounter being you're not allowed any meta discussion at all, I would be a tad concerned with that. So essentially, what I would say is you're not allowed to have discussions in terms of where you're going too far into players' combinations of actions.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. So, a player could ask for what they should do in this situation, or ask for some help, and I'd let people discuss it, but I wouldn't let them discuss anything that would rely
on
some
another player's
good-
actions. Yeah, I agree.
on another player's action.
It's-
And that is another player's action that isn't the obvious action that player will take. So
yes, if you're with a thief who is stealthed and has got their bow drawn and is behind the monster, you can be pretty convinced they're going to go for to use 5e terminology, a sneak attack next turn.
But
You can
if,
bank
for
on
example, you are planning to pretend you're going to sacrifice somebody,
that
they
is
use
something
that
you need to
information.
have. Yes. So I think what I will say is that if you are at the downtime, the exploration, or the downtime, the overland, or the exploration layer, those you may meta freely, but it is implicit that your characters are having the discussions you are having, but they're having it in character. So, they're speaking as they would speak, they're talking about the world in the terms they would talk about it in, rather than talking about these plans at a meta level. If you are in an encounter level, you can ask people for advice on what you should do, because your character is a more experienced dungeoneer than you are as a person sat on a desk. But you may not make complex plans integrating with other people based on those suggestions. And I think that would actually solve the problem that occurred in the zombie beholder situation that we were talking about earlier, which was really the goblin sacrifice situation. The zombie beholder was just the epitome of derailment.
I mean, it started off with goblins, but then
Yeah, but the goblins were the instigation of the problem.
Yes,
And so
then
in that situation, goblins are an encounter. By the time you know there are sacrificey goblins there, unless you guys have won your stealth check and have decided to evade, have decided to leave without interacting with them, At which point you're back at the exploration layer. You are in the encounter layer. What do each of you do? It is this person's initiative. Tell me what your plan is. Rather than, hey guys, you're in an encounter, talk out what your encounter plan is. And if, for example, the party succeeded in stealthing, because stealth is always made as a party check in old school, and decides they want to evade, which is a group decision they get to make before any kind of proper encounter would start, then they can go back into the previous room in the exploration level and talk about their plan.
Yes.
And that way the lines of what is in and out of character are always clear.
Which I believe that is the only situation where we had a problem within the session in terms of different play styles.
Yeah.
The next problem within a session is... Okay, firstly, do you have multiple DMs?
Not yet, but we will.
Okay. There's the next thing that can... where problems can occur. Which is... apart from 4th edition, D&D's rules can be interpreted in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Different DMs will do different things, and that will inevitably lead to the argument of different DMs running differently, therefore not getting consistent experience. And I try to solve this issue by just saying to everybody, rules is written.
But 5e rules is written is kind of dumb sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, you know.
That and...
What's the spell? Spirit healing? Whatever it is. Heal an entire party, 120 d6.
There is also situations where D&D 5e's rules are completely vague. A lot of the summoner spells, it is rather vague as to whether or not the player or the DM chooses what you actually summon.
Yeah.
And,
So, I sent you a link to my proposal document, which is where I'm writing up my notes. Have you read 2CI?
2CI.
So, the thing with old school play is old school play suffers from this, there not being rules for things significantly more than modern does, because of this idea we have called rulings over rules, which is that most things are going to be arbitrarily determined by the referee. Because the rules, frankly, don't have rules for most things. Where this gets a lot easier for us is a lot of these rulings over rules come into play at a higher level. They come into play with how magical crafting works. They come into play with how, things at that kind of level of abstraction where you actually have time to just get the DMs in a room to talk about, hey, what do we want to do about this? Which keeps things nice and easy. Where it gets more complicated is when someone says, hey, yeah, I want to jump over this 20-foot gap. Because at that point, you're pretty much purely, we don't have rules for how far you can jump. In 5e, you can check the how far can you jump rules. In old school play, your referee either says, you can make it, you can't make it, or roll a dice for me. And
the only version of D&D that has a rule set that is completely unambiguous for everything you want to do is 4th edition.
Yeah, I mean, that's because they wrote it as if it was a war game.
Yes, and guess what? Nobody liked 4th edition.
There are a very small group of people that will be very angry at you for saying that. And we can't even use that if they could read, they'd be unhappy about that, because clearly they can read, and that's the problem.
So for reference, there's some things in 4E that I really like.
Oh, same. 4E is one of the 4E has got a lot of stuff worth stealing. It's just also got a lot of stuff that
they try to solve the problem of linear fighters and quadrilateral wizards.
Yeah.
And people didn't like it.
No, because
it's just simply a fact of life. That somebody who just hits people with a sword is always going to be less powerful than a wizard.
Yeah. And this is actually
and
one
if
thing.
you try and make fighter do as much stuff as wizard. Wizard is just going to become like the fighter is just going to become like a wizard.
Have you seen the old school fighter and wizard, by the way? Because it's actually comedic.
No.
So I don't know how bad the stream delay is, but
It's bad enough.
so here's the rules for the old school fighter. I will just send you a screenshot of this page. Okay. Okay. And then here is the rules for the old school wizard, except actually the rules for how magic works are in a separate place, and they have huge lists of spells. Basically the fighter has no special abilities other than they get a castle eventually, whereas the magic user has this giant toolbox of spells to use. The thing is, and this is one thing I really like, 5th
25
edition...
seconds of delay, by the way.
How long?
25 seconds.
That's lower than I was expecting. So the other interesting thing is the magic user themselves. The 5th edition magic user has so many spells that are roll this many dice, inflict this much damage, and or maybe a status effect to this shape group of people or single target or a different save or a different damage type. And that makes up a comically large proportion of the spells.
Yes, but they're also the least useful of spells once you get beyond level 5.
I do
Scroll
agree.
spells are infinitely better.
I do agree here, but when we look at the kind of what the spells that your 11th level magic user is going to be casting, so your 11th level magic user, by the way, is on par with a 7th level fighter. No, hold on, 600,000. I'm reading the wrong number. 11th level to with a 12th level fighter. So a fighter's going to have a level on them just based on XP.
Oh yeah, because you don't progress at the same...
Nope,
Right.
and it's actually a really good mechanic, because it means that, for example, the elf is just straight up all of the benefits of a fighter plus all of the benefits of a magic user. So do you know what it costs to level them up? The XP costs added together. So they level up really slowly.
We have gotten off of track here.
We have, but so the thing I wanted to point out here, it's a just chatting stream, it's a fun discussion, is your 6th level spells for a magic user in old school are a lot more of your kind of like part water. Summon Invisible Stalker, Gaius, and a lot less of your deal X damage in X area to X thing. And it actually really helps with the fighter magic user dichotomy, because to be honest, if you are going into a long drawn out combat, the fighter is probably more useful than the magic user. The magic user might be able to stop the combat happening entirely, but once you get into scrapping, the fighter is the powerhouse of old school D&D, and it's why, interestingly enough, and this is no longer the case, but all the way up until when Wizards of the Coast set up 3rd edition, all the way back through the TSR era of D&D, the fighter was the most popular class for people to play. Which is just a really interesting note in how sort of cultures have changed over time there. But I do agree we have gotten off topic and we should try and get back on it.
However, actually we'll leave level balance stuff till later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that is a conversation we should have.
Yeah. We've sorted out all the in-session stuff now.
Yeah.
Except for balance. So probably we might as well go into a balance thing. That includes choosing the sessions and what sort of monsters you can go for. Which, essentially, you have 2 choices. And I'm going to mess up this analogy because I know it's one of the Elder Scrolls games.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember which one. It's either Oblivion or Morrowind, where everything you encounter is perfectly balanced for you.
Yeah.
No matter where you are. I can't remember which one it is.
Yeah.
That is the first choice. The second choice is if you walk towards a very scary looking volcano with lots of dead things around, and you are level 1, you are dead.
Yeah.
You are an idiot for going there. You are just dead.
Yeah.
Now, there was a place in Westmarches called Death Valley.
Yeah.
People kept on going in there. People kept on dying. People kept on going in there until they stopped dying because they managed to level up enough.
Yeah. So,
Oh, to be fair, when the party that did manage to get through there decided to just completely over-prepare for it and just knock out instantly.
yeah, I mean, it's when I had people out of character, people coming out of character and in character saying, "Hey Alice, can we borrow your wand of insta-killing things because we're going to Death Valley?" That's the point at which I was like, okay, they're actually preparing for it this time.
There was another place called Forlorn Hope.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, unlike Death Valley, Forlorn Hope was very much designed to be a situation of it doesn't matter what level you are.
It's
You will
gonna
never,
be. Yeah.
if you attempt to fight. There are helmed horrors in
Yeah.
Forlorn Hope, a lot of them, and I know this is almost exclusive to 5e, but 5e, if you're outnumbered, your chances of surviving are immediately reduced
Yeah,
by 90%.
Action economy is as important, if not more important, in old play as well. It's why, the basic retainer limit for a character is like 3 retainers.
But with old school D&D, you don't have bounded accuracy as far as I remember.
No, not at all.
So, essentially, from my understanding, old school D&D, you could throw 100 zombies at a high level party and it won't be a problem for them.
So this is where basic and expert kind of has a power cap that is a bit lower than AD&D, where essentially, yes and no, you can throw 100 zombies at a party and it won't be a problem for them if they're high level, but the reason it's not a problem for them when they're high level isn't because they can just fight them, it's because they can find a way to not fight them. And they have a higher pool of options to deal with them.
Certainly in 3.5e and Pathfinder and such, I know that is the case, or I've been informed that it's the
No,
case.
I think 3rd edition suffers from that a lot more than old school play. If anything, old school play has a kind of bounded accuracy. It's just not in the 5e sense of bounded accuracy. Because when you talk about bounded accuracy, you're talking about the fact that numbers always stay within a certain range.
Yeah.
So,
essentially in 5e, it doesn't matter how powerful your characters are. If you've got a lot of a weak enemy, you're still going to have trouble. You can't just go slaughtering through hordes of hundreds and hundreds of zombies.
yeah, so
Normally.
the
There
way
is
the way that old school play doesn't have that, or at least specifically the edition I'm running, is there's no such thing as a multi-attack, which reintroduces the problem of, hey, there's 100 of a thing. And it also, there is no, the only number that makes you better at fighting is your Thaco getting better, and your Thaco only gets better to a point. So, for example, the fighter's Thaco is never going to get better than what in 5th edition terms would be a +9 modifier. So, the best a fighter is ever going to get is if they rolled an 18 at character creation, because you don't have a way to increase your stats, short of finding magical nonsense in the world that increases your stats. You have a +3 sword, which is the highest plus swords go to, and you are level 13 or 14, at which point as a fighter you have got a +15 to hit. And so there is an upper bound that is fairly easy to calculate.
Okay.
Because of that.
Regardless.
Yeah.
These helm trolls will not harm you if you don't piss them off.
Yeah.
If you do piss them off,
you have problems.
Short of casting anti-magic field, there's nothing that will save you.
Yeah.
People died in there a lot. Some of the best sessions happened there because essentially I designed that entire area around the idea of if people piss the helmet horrors off, people are probably gonna die, but they should have a chance. And some amazing things happened there.
Yeah. So
I won't put that in there if I ran a westmarches again.
yeah,
Because there are people who are looking to win that encounter.
and it's not something that so this is where I think the mindset difference is very different.
Yes.
Because with old school play, combat is a failure state. That city was very much designed on the old school philosophy of combat is a failure state. Because by the time you are rolling dice in combat, it is your dice versus their dice, and more often than not, their dice beat your dice. That is very core to how old school D&D is designed. And so, as part of that, my plan for balance is to just not. Because,
So,
for example,
by the sounds of it, because you're running old school D&D, you can assume the mindset of old school D&D, which means you basically bypass the whole issue of balance and expectations that encounters will be balanced.
You never got to see me start up one of my open table sessions, did you?
Yep.
So my usual spiel at the start of them when we had new players were, if you've played D&D before, forget everything you know, because you're going to have 3 hit points and a sword deals 1d6, and if you lose those hit points, you die. And just hitting someone with that very simple maths of, if a sword hits you, statistically you will die, very much just out of the gate tempers their expectations away from to the kind of game it is, where your goal is to not get hit by a sword rather than be a better sword fighter.
Just as an aside, and this won't be very useful for dream stuff, but if you get a chance, ask Jordan about hardcore heroes.
Okay, I'll add Jordan on my list of people to talk to.
This is essentially hardcore heroes was his attempt of changing rules of 5e to make them like 2nd edition and encounter as a failure state.
Yeah.
I played it once. I decided I should avoid combat at all costs, which I did for as long as I played. Okay, so we've got around balance, we've got around...
Yeah, well, so this was the thing I was just going to talk about. Can you pick one of mountains, grassland, desert, forest, jungle, lakes, oceans, and swamps for me?
Do I get any other information other than that I'm choosing one of those?
It's where you're going on an adventure.
If I'm attempting to avoid combat...
But you're also trying to get gold.
And I'm trying to get gold.
Because gold is XP.
Mountains.
Okay. So, in the mountains, you have got a 2 in 8 chance of me randomly rolling on the dragon table. If you spend... well, okay. So, you've got a 2 in 6 chance of an encounter, followed by a 2 in 8 chance of me rolling dragon on the table, and 100% of the things on the dragon table will just win in a fight. When you encounter said dragon, you have a 1 in 36 chance that I roll that it is instantly hostile. At which point it will use its breath attack, which deals its HP and damage in an area. Its HP is probably 30, so a bunch of people on this journey are taking 30 damage. That is the path to a bullshit insta-death in old school play, where you can't do anything about it. But when you actually look at those numbers, In fact, it gets even sillier than that, because if we go have a look at the numbers here, so after you've decided to go to a mountain, one of the more dangerous areas, while in a mountain, you have got. In fact, let me check this one in the core rules. What's the encounter rate in a mountain? The encounter rate in a mountain is 3 in 6. So you've got, to start with, you've got a 3 in 6 chance. Then you've got a 2 in 8 chance of it being a dragon. Then you've got a 4 in 6 chance, roughly, of failing your stealth against said dragon and just being able to not fight it. I'll just go to the 2. Then you have a 1 in 36 chance. Or no, wait, 6 times, yeah, 36. A 1 in 36 chance that it's instantly hostile. Which means, having gone to a mountain... hold on. And instead of or. If you spend a day in a mountain... okay. The accuracy on this is not high enough for me to tell you how astronomically low the chances are that the dice insta-fuck you. It reports that there is a 100% chance you will not get insta-fucked. 2d6... oh yeah, 2d6 equals 2. You're correct. Okay, here we go. You have got a 0.23% chance to get insta-fucked by a dragon. That is my balance threshold. My balance threshold is that if someone goes to a mountain, there is a 0.23% chance that a dragon just insta-kills them, and there's nothing they can do. And I think as long as I'm transparent about that being the balance threshold, people are going to have the right expectations.
Yes. Although I think a more modern 5e audience who doesn't... I know people who would say that is unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree it's unacceptable, but how often does a 26 in 1,000 chance actually happen?
You'd be surprised. I'm running a campaign and I recently rolled, I think it was like 3 nat 20s in a row.
Oh yeah, I mean, the situation that Tomathor just mentioned in chat, Sasha rolling Evil Wizard Tower on our first playtest after the introduction. So we were doing game design a while ago, and he essentially rolled 3 nat 1s in a row in order to trigger an extremely unlikely event, and it was really good fun. And it was on one of our first playtests of the game, and we were like, do we just throw out that entire playtest and assume that that's not how a game will go?
But yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you do that and you give your players a rough idea, if they know mountain's bad, what are some of the safer areas?
Everywhere that isn't settled has a 1 in 8 chance of the dragon table. And the dragon table is obviously by far the most dangerous table. Safest, you're probably looking at grasslands, though. By far, most likely, you're just going to run into some animals
so you assume
or some
it's
insects.
common knowledge.
Yeah, it's very common knowledge. Like,
then you generally won't have and if people are smart enough to avoid combat, then you generally won't have a problem with balance.
Yeah, that's my goal as well.
Want to fight, or if people expect fights, then you just don't have to worry. But
yeah. So as long as I keep it very transparent, and I might actually just put it in this proposal document, because I'm going to make this proposal document public to people. I'll put it in the specifications, just so that I know to keep it very transparent. Okay.
The next, so that's balance. That's all that. The next thing is, what can you do in the base? We never really answered this question for the West Marches because we kept on changing our minds. And the fact that we kept on changing our minds was probably a bad thing.
So I've opened the Strongholds chapter of the core rulebook. this is
If
pretty
there are
much...
simple rules that are easy to administrate but require little to no effort on the DM's part,
Yeah.
then go ahead.
Um,
Otherwise, be prepared for a lot of work.
so it's been working out okay so far. The general beat of it is if you would like to build a decent building in already conquered civilized land, and the landowner is happy for you to do that, where the landowner is is essentially a DMPC. They are there for me to go. Essentially, you guys are the retainers of this person. Please keep that in mind as you play, because your starting keep is their keep. If you go and eventually someone has the funds to set up a new keep for you to adventure out of, which will cost you a lot of money, but if you eventually do have the funds to do that, go ahead. But right now, your safe haven is predicated upon this NPC. So permission is essentially granted automatically as long as the proposal for building is sensible. And then it's literally 3k gold to throw down a building, and then whatever the cost of the shit you want to put in the building.
Yeah. As a general rule, minimize your administration.
Yeah, that's my goal. So the buildings, the way
Make your NPCs boring and automatic.
Yes.
Do not make them interesting.
So
If you make them interesting, you'll have trouble.
I agree. Sudri was interesting, but she was also just like, she wasn't interesting in the Helmand kind of way. She was interesting in the, oh, she actually has a backstory kind of way.
Talking of backstory.
We'll get onto the backstory discussion in a minute. So, the big thing that I did with the open table last year is the primary function of buildings is that they either provide a direct service to the player community, which has to be a service you administrate, I'm not touching it, or they increase the chance that a retainer will come to the south and join the pool of retainers available for hire, which is a very easy thing for me to just dangle in front of the player base, because having a bigger pool of retainers equals having a bigger pool of better retainers, and retainers are meat shields that die so you don't have to.
The other... Yeah. But, yeah, basically minimize your administration.
Yeah.
Backstory. Player backstory. Ignore player backstory.
Yeah, that was the plan. I mean...
Because if you start looking into one player's backstory, it's feel a bit unfair not to look into all of them, and then you have a problem.
So my plan for backstory is basically, you create your character, you pick a place that your character is from in the non-westmarches world, which I will show you, for example, a page of on stream right. I'll just send it to you. Just to give you an idea of the kind of information being presented to the players. Wait, crap. Projects. Role-playing games. Dungeons & Dragons. 1981. Rule books. Adventurer's Guide to Adan. Rendered. Yeah, so here is, for example, one of the countries you might choose to be from. It's on stream, and it's also, I just sent you a copy of the file. Mm-hmm. You pick your religious convictions, if you have any. Here is the page on... The introduction page on that. There are further pages on, like, each of the gods and what their tenets are and how they expect you to behave, which really only matters if you're playing a cleric or a paladin or someone that gives a shit. I very much take the attitude that the average person should not care about the cosmic battle between good and evil. Or in this case, chaos and law. And so that's the... That's literally going to be the broad strokes of backstory. I don't care about your character backstory further than where you're from and maybe what you did before you were an adventurer, because there's a table of that is very easy for people to pull from. And the only reason I remotely care about that is that there is an inside chance, and it has happened before, that in a session I might go, wait, your character, they worked in a vineyard before becoming an adventurer. Here's the thing you realise.
The other thing with backstory players in general is, if you're going to say, yes, roleplay is going to happen, you're going to have to decide how you're going to handle inter-character conflict.
Yeah.
Which can become inter-player conflict.
Yes. So
in westmarches, we had a rule which was don't take any direct aggressive actions against each other.
Yeah.
People figured out ways around that rule multiple times.
So I think my general attitude is that we both know who I'm referring to when I say this without me saying any names. There are players who I would have just booted from the westmarches for consistently trying to work around the rules against being a shithead. And I think with this being something that I am running online now, where, I mean, I'm going to mention it at GARPs, but, like, I am not beholden to a society where someone can go and moan to a university. I have a lot more freedom to just say, look, you're pushing your luck, stop, or I'm just going to kick you. And so I think that puts me in a fairly luxurious position when it comes to dealing with these kinds of conflicts, because I can essentially say, sort it out or get out.
Yeah. That's simple enough. Yeah. It's just something you have to consider.
Yeah.
So...
The other thing I've done to make my life easier there is the world is experiencing an unprecedented period of peace right now. So no one's starting point from their backstory should put them hugely at odds with each other.
So that solves most of the problems apart from the economics.
Yeah, economy. So, when you say the economic problem, how do you perceive what happened in the West Marches to have instigated an economic problem?
We didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
We didn't have a... So... This... Okay. First, this inherently ties to, session creation and session planning.
Yeah.
If you've got one DM, this isn't a problem. If you've got multiple DMs, then you have to, you should write a bunch of guidelines for what can be in a session.
Yeah.
So what rewards should be expected, how much you should work to get those rewards, and more importantly, if DMs are also players,
yeah,
you need to ensure there is no conflict of interest.
Yeah.
I do know there were quite a few in the West Marches. There were a couple of very, very, very vocal voices who thought that players should not be DMs ever.
Yeah. At which point, you don't have any DMs. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've read the full section on my plan for keeping DMs from burning out and making sure there's availability, but I've literally just said, if you want a game and there's no DMs that have opened their time slot for you to be able to run, create an economic incentive for them to run. And you will probably find fairly quickly that one of the referees' time schedules opens up a bit when there's 50 quid on the table to run a session within the next hour.
You have to be careful with the in-game incentives, folks. People who don't DM will might end up resenting the people who do DM for getting stuff. So you have to find a balance there. And generally, it's a case of if you're all adults about it, generally that's quite simple.
Yeah.
If you're not, well, you have the ability to just boot people, which I didn't.
Yeah, you were in the very difficult position of running within a closed environment within a society. Which, to be honest, I consider it a blessing that I did not have a single problem in my time running the open table last year. And I think what it boiled down to is I set the tone so quickly that there wasn't room for anyone to get the wrong idea and to cause problems.
I think you also had less people.
Not in terms of total number of players. I ran less games because I was a one-man band. But,
Actually, I don't know. I didn't really pay attention to...
How many characters actively played in a session over the course of westmarches, roughly? Do you know?
I can pull up the numbers. How many characters that were active for, let's say, more than 3 sessions?
Sure. I know the same number for mine off the top of my head. I'm going to say more than 2 sessions, purely because I ran less sessions.
Be looking to the 30-ish range.
Okay, so I'm in the mid-20s. But purely because I had really high throughput and because I ran for 10 people every week. You know, it being a 10-person table really opens the doors for people to just sit down and for new players to play and then come back in another week. Which is not something I plan on keeping up online, purely because I think it's a lot easier to run for that many people at a table than it is to run for that many people on Discord.
But, yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, you need to find a balance there. The other thing is
so I think
create guidelines, and you almost, if it gets big enough, you almost need a head DM, or not even a head DM, somebody who's in charge that doesn't DM or play.
Yeah. So my plan right now.
Plan for Jordan was going to do.
But obviously, the question is the westmarches dead, or are they just like in hibernation?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fair. My perspective from the outside is it's dead, but like...
I think it's dead. I think it essentially... Last year? Because it is last year now.
Yeah.
After I left, it was sort of like... The player pool reduced massively.
Oh, you know that thing me and Santo said would happen with the plan they were going with? That they wouldn't get any new players and that the old ones were leaving. Yeah, okay. So it did what we expected it to do.
Yeah, essentially. Although I think part of that was it didn't really get started until Christmas as well. I mean, that's what actually killed it, though.
Yeah. So my plan for economic balance. So in old school play, we have this very nice trait that gold is experience.
Yeah.
The treasure you earn directly equates to the amount of XP you gain. Specifically, how I run that is that money spent is XP earned. And I set different XP conversion rates based on what the thing you're spending on is. So if you're spending on something that benefits the community, such as upgrading the armory, getting an armor smith in, getting some potions made that everyone can take out on adventures, you get 100% of the gold converted into XP. If you are working on magical crafting, where you are creating magical artifacts that, though will directly benefit you or someone else initially, will fall into the common hands, you know, if you die or something like that, that's 75%. And if you are doing something purely as a personal purchase, then that's 50%.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraging communal spending with that. And the other thing is every type of monster that you come across has a treasure table entry. And the treasure tables all spell out roughly how much gold is expected yield from each treasure table. So my plan for economic balance essentially boils down to if they kill a dragon, they get a dragon horde, and I'm okay with that. Because realistically, if they have a dragon horde, They're going to spend most of that money for the benefit of everyone anyway, because that's what gives them the most XP. And at the end of the day, they're driven by XP, not gold.
But in 5e, it's suppose part of the economic issue that we ran into. What this is an important one. Make sure your DMs actually know the system.
Yeah.
Essentially, the two DMs I started it off originally with they came from Pathfinder, not
Yeah.
5e. They fundamentally misunderstood some core concepts of 5e.
I'd agree there.
One of them didn't realise the knock spell was a thing.
Yeah.
The number of times you got screwed over by it was enormous.
I mean, the knock spell is kind of a bullshit spell, but that's why you make sure that, you know, every goblin in the dungeon hears it.
There's no way of getting around knock spells. Not use locks.
Yeah, don't lock things.
Or the thing is in 5e there are these things called wards, and you can just create a ward.
Yeah, you've got in old school you've got wizard lock, and a wizard lock can only be unlocked by someone that is a better wizard than you. So all you do is you say, "Ah, yeah, this is a 10th level wizard lock."
Campaign, there's a wizard's tower. I've been running for a few friends. There's a wizard tower. Wizard tower has a lot of iron chests. All have wards cast on them.
Yeah.
If you attempt to use the knock spell on them, you will get fireballed.
Yeah.
The number of fireballs from myself in that session was impressive.
Yeah. So you've got the old classic wizard lock spell, which just magic users need to be a high enough level in order to open it.
But essentially, yes. Make
Yeah.
sure your DMs not only know the rules of the system, but also
the philosophy of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I think pitching to the OSR, I have an easier starting position there, because the OSR is a philosophy before it's a game. Specifically,
whereas if you read through the entire player's handbook and DMG and monster manual for 5e,
yeah.
you
Specifically, it is
need to play 5e with a DM who has run through 5e before you understand this is how things work.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, those DMs, while there were some initial problems, they very, very quickly got used to it, but
Yeah.
there's still some teething problems,
So I'm very privileged
By
there.
the end of it, Adam got pretty good at just running
Yeah, no, I agree
some
there.
really good sessions in 5e.
Yeah, and I think
If he didn't like the fact that
I have a very prominent advantage that pretty much every person that I might take on as someone that's running is going to be intimately familiar with this, which I put up on stream now as the Principia Apocrypha, which is basically the rules of running. It's literally just the documentation of the philosophy of old school play. So, rulings over rules. Divest yourself of their fate. Leave preparation flexible. Build responsive situations. Embrace chaos but uphold logic. Let them off the rails. XP for discovery and adversity. Player ingenuity over character ability. Cleverness rewarded, not thwarted. Ask them how they do it. Let them manipulate the world. Good items are unique tools. Don't mind the fourth wall. Offer tough choices. Subvert their expectations. Build challenges with multiple answers and challenges with no answer. Combat should be deadly but avoidable. Keep up pressure. Let the dice kill them but telegraph lethality. Reveal the situation. Give them layers to peel. Don't bury the lead. Keep the world alive. NPCs aren't scripts. And so that's like the referee philosophies. And all of these I think are really great for even modern games, but they are at the heart of old school play. And then there's the player philosophies, which is what I'm going to be essentially putting in a summary document for the players. But it's learn when to run, Combat as war, not sport. Don't be limited by your character sheet. Live your backstory, which is one of the key ones here, which is don't put much work into a backstory for your characters. Their experiences in play will be more real to you and your friends than anything you write. An early death won't quite sting quite as much, and a survivor has real tales to tell and experience to take pride in. Power is earned, heroism proven. Scrutinize the world, interrogate the fiction. The only dead end is death, and play to win, save a loss. And so this is like a really good document for just giving people the fundamentals of old school play, and it's something that I'm basically going to make required reading. And I think that should get, philosophically, all the DMs and players on the same page, even if they're new to OSR or they're new to gaming in general.
Okay. I think that covers nearly everything.
Yeah.
Apart from administration. And, wait, no. Firstly, how players go on sessions, initiation of sessions. You need to figure out how that works.
So,
and I suggest you do not do what we did, where we essentially went go into the wilderness, and instead go, oh, here's a list of sessions.
Yeah. So, my plan is to say, a DM. It all starts with the referee. Whereas with westmarches, it often started with the players and then referees filled those, which you changed eventually, but that's how it began. A referee opens themselves to run. They say, I am opening myself to run a session between these times. At which point, it is the responsibility of the players... the DM also will note any areas that they are willing to run, but I expect most will keep it quite broad, because I'm going to try and communicate what is out there fairly effectively with everyone. And a lot of it is just, hey, this is the dungeon from B4, published in 1987, just go run that. And so I've got a much easier time there. And so a referee will open up a time slot. The first group of people that exceeds the DM's minimum player threshold, which will probably be 4 or 3 for most people, I imagine. The first group of people to assemble a party willing to go somewhere the DM is willing to run for gets the session. And I'm probably going to throw together a Discord bot to automate that, because as much as so this is the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, code solutions. I'm trying to avoid them at all costs because they suck, and we both know that.
You say that.
Okay. Character sheets is one of the reasons I called you on initially, because I wanted to talk about them, but we'll get to that in a minute. The big thing for me is I want to try and minimize code solutions as much as possible, because I want to have as intuitive a new player experience as possible. And so
I was going to talk about administration.
Yeah. But so that's going to be the general flow of how I plan on running it. And if no DMs are opening up a time slot, and a group of people want to organize and say, hey, we're this party, and if a DM opens up a time slot, here's £40 on the table, and then I magically open up my time slot, I don't have a problem with that. We're all adults. We all need to be paid for our time.
Okay, actually, there is one other thing you need to consider here, which is, are you okay with your game essentially divulging into 4 separate campaigns where you have the same 4 DMs running for the same groups? If you're okay, you don't need to do anything. If you're not, you're going to need to do something.
It doesn't bother me. I think the first come first served aspect will solve that. And I at least will be trying to run an open table once a week, where I say, I am open for a minimum of 6 players and a maximum of 8 players. And I will make sure that the group that gets in there is a fairly diverse one. There might be, I'm okay for players to keep coming back, of course. And that's how it tended to work at the table I ran at the university, and it worked out really well. I tended to have between 3 and 4 different players each week.
I'm going to have to disappear in about 10 minutes.
All right.
So, administration.
Yeah.
What information do you need to keep track of? That's generally
So this is the problem. I if I was running a West Marches at the university still, and this is what I did for my open table, I'm okay to just trust players and their sheets. Because I will generally be able to keep a good beat on what was on them and not stress too much about it. Running a public online game, I do need some increased element of tracking. So I essentially want to be able to keep track of what a player's inventory is, which magic items they own, which I'm not concerned about weapons and armor because weapons and armor are all dirt cheap in old school, but which magic items they have access to, I definitely want to keep track of, and what the net combination of their extant experience and gold is.
so. Solutions you can use for all of this essentially come down to how much money do you have?
I have, thanks to my wonderful Patreon supporters at patreon.com/LLBluemeyer, I have actually a persistent income that I'm investing 100% into gaming materials.
So,
Which has enabled me to drop £100 this month on buying Gavin's new game. So money is less of an issue there, not because I'm poor,
it will be.
but it's yeah.
So, alright. The simplest way is to do what I did in the westmarches, which is create a spreadsheet, create some fairly simple Google scripts,
Yeah.
and just do it that way. It'll be a pain for some people. Others, for some reason, loves my spreadsheets. I hated them.
Yeah, I hated your spreadsheets. I assumed you did too.
Some people loved them. The next solution, which unfortunately you can only use for 5e,
Is D&D Beyond.
is D&D Beyond. The other solution, which is the super expensive solution, Fantasy Grounds.
Yeah, so I actually own Fantasy Grounds.
Do you have the awesome license that allows people that only have the demo version to play with you?
Yes, because I bought it when it was really, really cheap, like 10 years ago.
Okay.
I will note, I have not booted up Fantasy Grounds in the last 8 years, but I did buy it back when I was like 12, because it was dirt cheap at the time.
But yeah. Fantasy Grounds is also the other option. I would have to research a bit more into how you go about importing and exporting characters.
So
but
that was one I was actually looking into, though, is using a campaign manager, because there's lots of campaign managers out there. And one that one that I've used in the past is, I need to double check the name of it. Hold on, I'm in their Discord. It's down here somewhere in the bowels of my Discord communities. The ones I only look at when I need to, rather than the ones I check actively. It should be next to Legend Keeper. Where's the Legend Keeper Discord gone? There it is. Is Chronica. The problem is Chronica charges you based on how many players you have, and so to run a West Marches game I would need to be basically pulling in from the community that's interested in it $20 a month, which is what I'm pulling in right now, but I don't want to invest 100% of my Patreon earnings in running a West Marches game, especially when I don't know what the overlap between my patrons and the West Marches players is going to be.
The simplest and cheapest way, by far, is just to use Google spreadsheets and setting up a few G scripts in order to create a read-only version of players' sheets you can modify when you're actually in game and stuff like that.
The thing is,
it requires a bit of coding, and spreadsheets are not always the best solution to character sheets. But it works.
The other one that I was actually talking about earlier on stream is Roll, which is a new community that is going into beta next at some point within the next month and a half, which I should have 1 year's worth of essentially the ultimate account on that gives you unlimited players. So I'm going to mess around with that and see how well that handles having. Because the thing I don't want to have 60 players, and when I hit start game, it sends an invitation to 60 of them. So I'm going to need to mess around with how that service works. But if this service works for those purposes, then I may just punt my administration stuff of characters into role. The downside there is it means that people have to step away from Discord. And to my mind, keeping everything in one place will help onboarding, because you don't need to join 6 different communities in order to do everything. You just need to be in one place. And so the other solution I had in mind, as much as we all hate code solutions, was throwing together a simple Discord bot, but the problem is it's really unintuitive for people to edit.
Yeah. Or you could try and do what I tried to do and give up and try and write a full-on web app.
Yeah, which, I mean, I could throw together... So the big advantage I have is that character sheets for old school play are dirt simple. If I will send you real quick the character sheet that I made a few days ago that I'm going to be live demoing for the first time in tomorrow's stream. It is character sheets, control panel sheet. I've shown it on stream enough, they know what it looks like. I'll just send you an image. Which is this sheet. That is not where I wanted to send that. Delete that. Send this over to you up here. So this is the most complicated it's possible to make a sheet for the game I'm playing, and half of that information is filled in automatically based on what your class is. In fact, almost all of that information is filled in automatically based on a combination of your class and level. The only things that aren't are your languages. You may have some languages that are determined by your personal preference rather than class and level, and your armor and weapons, and your equipment and treasure. Essentially, it's only that bottom, and of course how much current XP you have. Other than that, everything else is derived from your class level and your 6 ability scores. So I may just try to make a digital version of this sheet that's fairly easy for me to keep track of, because it should be relatively simple in the grand scheme of things. Versus 5e, where... I mean, you have to write in a 7-point font to fill in some parts of the 5e character sheet, so... that really says everything you need to know.
Yeah, 5e character sheets can get incredibly complicated.
So, I don't know where I'm at with that side of admin. For like, admin as in character tracking admin. It's one of the problems I definitely need to solve, and I don't think I'll be able to, like, commit to a solution until much closer to... when
so one thing I would suggest is, once you found a solution, don't change it. Ever.
Yeah, that's the plan. That's the plan is I need something future-proofed, and that's why me throwing up a very simple interface that just gives people a character sheet. Like I was literally thinking, you don't even make an account. I give you a private URL, a private keyword, and you don't share those with people. And if you do, I bollock you and run a single command on a command line on a server to reset it. And essentially having it just be this, like a very simple web app where you can go and see your sheet and edit it and add things and remove things, and I can see everyone's sheets. And they're literally just a copy of that sheet I sent to you, but rendered in a web browser using browser stuff.
Not to include any personal identification information as described by the General Data Protection Regulation.
Oh, I don't need to worry about the GDPR, because so here's this wonderful thing in the GDPR. If you are taking people's... If the service you provide is not one that would at all indicate you should provide personal information, you are not on the hook if people do it. So, for example, Pastebin can't be held accountable for someone putting their bank details up in a Pastebin, because clearly that's something you shouldn't be doing. So the GDPR does give some allowances on that front, which is nice. I know this because for work we had to figure out, do we need to like put warnings all over a web page because of the GDPR, you know? It's why when you go to YouTube you don't get a big GDPR notification the second you try and write a comment. But yeah, so that should be fine. But yeah, that's sort of where my plan is at right now. Do you think that would be a good solution?
Yeah, you just need somewhere to put it.
Website on someone's phone with some mobile compatibility.
And if you are running it online, you also need to figure out how you're running it online.
I've already got all my servers set up, so that's not a problem.
Are you using Roll20 or are you using something?
Oh yeah, yeah. So again, I want to try. I think I want to stay in Discord as much as possible, so it will literally just be like, you will literally like it will be you go to.
And not like me, who decided, screw it, I'm getting fancy grounds because I'm fed up of all this horribleness.
Yeah, what it will essentially be, I think, is you go to that website URL I just sent you, and a box appears, and you type in. Let me go pick a random monster from the monster manual.
It's first edition, so I can't say Tarrasque.
You type in. Yeah, Tarrasque is in first edition. It's in the first edition second monster manual. You type in a Tuatara, which is an 8-foot long iguana-like creature, and then it gives you your character sheet. And then.
But surely look around your website, which I didn't realize you had, and see if I can break it.
Don't break my website. I've not done any data security on it. No, it has. It's got like basic security on it, but don't break it. No one's broken it so far, and like a lot of bots hit that website. I've got analytics running. That website gets hit by a lot of bots every day. So, but yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's been great having you on the show to talk about all of this stuff that I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing.
That's okay.
I may hit you up for like questions or comments in future because you are the person I know that has, you know, come out the other side of running one of these. And I think that
alive, barely.
Yeah, and with no disrespect to you, yours was enough of a disaster that I think there's a lot to be learned from with your experiences with it.
Yes.
And like, you don't want to talk to the people that succeeded because they'll tell you how to succeed. You want to talk to the people that had it turn into a steaming pile of death because they'll tell you how to avoid it turning into a steaming pile of death.
Like that badly.
Yeah.
It did happen in the game.
What happened, sorry?
Well, then we sort of had an in-game, not really.
Yeah, I mean, you have more of an in-game than mine did, which was, COVID happened, so Season 1's over. Sorry.
To win. It had a sense of conclusion for me. They did the thing, which was figure out what happened to the Alanian.
Yeah. No, you had some narrative conclusion, and for me, I'm not worried about narrative conclusion because the big mystery is the world is weird, and if someone wants to ask me why the world is weird, the gods and the Eldritch Horrors had a bit of a fight, and the Eldritch Horrors kind of won a bit more than people would like them to, and now the world is weird.
So you're playing in the mind of Azapov.
I mean, if you want to actually get into some of the deep lore behind the setting I'm running in, it's a direct continuation of the Anbirn games I ran 4 years ago in GARPS.
Yes.
It still has the same gods. They've just been progressively losing. And as they've lost, things have changed more and more.
Have more planets been crashing into spaceships?
Well, no, because every other planet in the universe except for the one that we're on has been completely overrun by Eldritch Horrors.
No.
The stars in the sky are largely not stars anymore. That's where the setting is at. So
fair enough.
It is a direct continuation in spirit, in that the gods are the same gods and could probably talk about some of the things that happened, but the people that are still alive in the setting are very far removed from anything that happened back in the old Ambien days.
Well, fair enough.
But yeah. But yeah, no, thank you very much for hopping on and having this chat. I hope that you've enjoyed talking about everything that happened with the OSR, not with the West Marches game. Sorry.
Yes, if you have any more questions,
I will.
please feel to ask me.
Yeah, I will. I will hit you up. All right.